The sun hadn't even risen yet. But the lights were already flashing. Red. Blue. Red. Blue. The boy stood still on the sidewalk, both hands up. His backpack laid open beside him, homework spilling out onto the concrete. 3 officers had guns drawn. 2 more had their knees bent, ready to charge. And one, the one with the loudest voice, was screaming into his radio. "Black male! Suspect is non-compliant!" But the boy hadn't moved. Not a single step. Not a single word. His name was Elijah. 14 years old. Soft voice. Quiet eyes. A hoodie too big for his frame. He had only stepped out to catch the school bus. He never made it. A neighbor had called the police, reporting a suspicious figure outside their home. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. But what happened next would shake the entire city. One of the officers stepped forward, hand on his holster. Eyes locked on Elijah like he was holding a weapon, not a science project. "Where's your ID?" the officer barked. "I'm going to school," Elijah said quietly. "My ID is in my bag." The officer didn't look. He nodded instead. And 2 other officers rushed forward, grabbing Elijah by both arms, pushing him face first onto the pavement. "Stop resisting!" one yelled. "I'm not," Elijah tried to say. But his voice was muffled by the asphalt. A passing car slowed down. The driver pulled out a phone. Another window rolled down across the street. A woman whispered, "That's Ms. Reed's son." But no one stopped it. No one stepped in. Elijah's wrists were zip-tied. His backpack was tossed into the patrol car. And within minutes he was gone. The video, shaky, recorded from across the street, hit the internet that same afternoon. A small clip. 23 seconds. But it lit a fire. This is a child. He didn't do anything. Just because he's black. The police department issued a statement. "A standard procedure based on a suspicious person report," they said. "No excessive force. No injuries. No racial profiling." But they didn't mention his age. They didn't mention the zip ties. And they didn't mention that Elijah had never once raised his voice. The school sent a letter to parents, saying, "A student was detained off campus this morning," and that it was under review. Ms. Reed, Elijah's mother, didn't wait for the review. She stormed into the precinct 30 minutes after the arrest. Her voice was calm. Her face was stone. But the silence behind her was deafening. Because she didn't come alone. Behind her were 2 men in suits. One carried a briefcase. The other wore a federal badge. And the officers who had arrested Elijah were about to learn something they never expected. Elijah Reed was not just another black boy in the wrong neighborhood. He was the son of someone they should have known. Someone they feared. Someone who had just picked up the phone. Inside the precinct, Elijah sat alone. The zip ties had left red marks on his wrists. His hoodie was stretched. His backpack, the one with the math workbook, had been emptied onto the floor. He hadn't spoken since they brought him in. A sergeant walked by the holding room. Didn't even glance inside. Another officer leaned on the counter, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. The desk clerk looked up once. Then looked back down. This wasn't new. They'd done this before. The boy was black. He looked older. He didn't answer fast enough. That was enough. Until Ms. Reed walked in. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The man next to her, tall, bald, and silent, flashed a badge. DOJ. The room shifted. Chairs scraped. Radios buzzed. The sergeant suddenly looked very awake. But the officer who had tackled Elijah, Officer Granger, stepped out from the hallway, still wearing his sunglasses inside. He smirked. "You the mom?" he asked, arms folded. Ms. Reed didn't answer. The DOJ agent stepped forward. "Where is the boy?" "Detained," Granger replied. "Under suspicion. Waiting for clearance." "Clearance for what?" Granger shrugged. Possible trespassing. Loitering. Maybe intent to. Intent to what? The agent interrupted, voice firm. Granger's smirk faded slightly. Look, he fit the description. We had a call. That's protocol. And did you verify his identity before using force? He refused to show ID. He's 14. The agent's voice didn't rise, but it dropped, heavy like a weight. Granger blinked. He looked older. He muttered. The room fell silent. Ms. Reed finally stepped forward. Elijah is an honors student. He has perfect attendance. He volunteers on weekends. And this morning, he was arrested for existing. Granger scoffed. Ma'am, let's not play the race card. That was the wrong thing to say. The other agent, the one with the briefcase, opened it slowly. Inside, papers, photos, timestamps. Every second of the arrest. Every report Officer Granger ever filed. Every complaint already sitting in a database. This wasn't the first time. Ms. Reed looked him in the eye. You didn't just arrest a child, she said. You arrested my child. And you don't even know who I am, do you? Granger's smirk returned. Should I? But someone else did. From the back of the room, an older officer stood up, Captain Diaz. He walked over slowly. Looked at Elijah through the glass. Then turned to Granger. You messed up, he said quietly. Granger narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? Captain Diaz turned to Ms. Reed. Then nodded, with something between fear and respect. I remember you, he said. Elijah's mother didn't smile. She didn't blink. You should, she said. Because 20 years ago, Ms. Reed wasn't just another woman in this city. She was a prosecutor. A damn good one. The kind who put dirty cops behind bars. And now she was back. Not in court. Not in front of cameras. But right here. Face to face with the very system she used to trust. And this time, it was personal. Officer Granger wasn't backing down. Even after the badge. Even after the file. Even after Captain Diaz stepped aside and said, Let them go. He crossed his arms. Tilted his head. This is a police matter, he said slowly. And that boy? He's still under suspicion. The DOJ agent stepped forward. You have no cause to detain him further. Granger smirked again. I've got cause. He matched the description. He refused to comply. That's enough for me. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was loud in a different way, a tension that vibrated behind everyone's eyes. He was zip-tied without resisting. The agent pressed. You threw him to the ground. There are witnesses. Video. Granger looked around. Shrugged. Let him post it. Internet forgets in a week. And just like that, the room snapped. Ms. Reed's fists clenched. But she didn't yell. She didn't scream. Instead, she turned slowly, toward the glass wall where Elijah still sat, slumped in a plastic chair. He hadn't moved. Granger saw it. He smirked harder. Maybe the kid learned a lesson today. Captain Diaz looked down. Said nothing. And then, as if that wasn't enough, Granger doubled down. You know what I think? He said. I think you people always make it about race. The second someone gets cuffed, suddenly it's a civil rights crisis. The room froze. You people. 2 words. Too familiar. Too dangerous. The DOJ agent took a step forward, but Ms. Reed raised her hand. Not now. Not yet. Because the moment wasn't ready. Granger turned toward her, arms open like a man who believed the world owed him something. You wanna sue? Go ahead. You think the department's gonna care? The union's got my back. Always has. And for a moment, it was true. He had the power. He had the shield. He had the arrogance of someone who's done this before, and never been held accountable. Ms. Reed breathed in. Deep. Slow. Elijah, she said, barely above a whisper. Inside the holding room, the boy looked up. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Because he stood straight, steady, silent, and walked toward the glass. On the other side, Officer Granger rolled his eyes. "What's he gonna do?" he muttered. The DOJ agent pulled out a folder. Not thick, but very, very heavy. "I was hoping we wouldn't need this," he said. "But since Officer Granger insists..." He opened it. And suddenly, the room belonged to Ms. Reed. Inside the folder, a list of every arrest Granger made in the last 3 years. The racial breakdown, 91% black males. Body cam footage from 2 separate complaints, both lost in internal review. And a final piece, a letter. Signed, stamped, sealed. From the Attorney General. Granger's smirk twitched. Just a little. "What is this?" he asked. Ms. Reed stepped forward. "It's your record. It's your pattern. And it's your reckoning." Granger scoffed, but his hand tightened into a fist. "You don't scare me," he said. "You should be scared," the agent replied. "Why?" "Because you're not just looking at suspension," he said. "You're looking at federal charges." That word hit different. Federal. Suddenly, the coffee-sipping clerk looked up. The rookie officer near the door stepped back. Captain Diaz exhaled. "You can't!" Granger shouted. "We already did," the agent said. And then it happened. Elijah stepped out of the room. His wrist still red. His eyes still tired. But his back? Straight. He didn't speak to Granger. He walked past him. And for the first time, Granger stepped back. The room didn't cheer. There was no applause. Just a quiet shifting, like justice breathing through a cracked door. But Elijah. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. Because what came next would shake more than just this precinct. It would shake the city, the mayor, the department. And it would all start with one phone call. The phone call didn't go to the police chief. It didn't go to internal affairs. It didn't even go to the mayor. It went straight to Washington. Because Ms. Reed wasn't just a former prosecutor. She wasn't just Elijah's mother. She was something else entirely, something no one in that precinct had bothered to look up. She was a senior advisor on the Federal Civil Rights Task Force. And 2 hours after Elijah walked out of that holding room, the call was returned. Not by an assistant. Not by a secretary. But by the director of the Department of Justice. 3 words. "We're coming down." Within 48 hours, things started moving. Fast. Officer Granger was placed on administrative leave. His body cam footage, long missing, was suddenly found and leaked. Elijah's arrest video, once just a Twitter clip, became the top story on every national network. CNN, NBC, even late-night shows. But that was just the beginning. Because Ms. Reed wasn't done. She called a press conference. Not flashy. Not emotional. Just her. A podium. And a thick stack of documents. "This is not just about my son," she said. "This is about every black boy who's been silenced, shoved, and shackled for no reason." She read names. One by one. Boys under 18. All arrested by Officer Granger. None charged. All quietly released and forgotten. Until now. The silence from the department was deafening. Then came the twist no one saw coming. A second folder. Sealed. Inside emails. Internal memos. A record of complaints buried, not just by Granger, but by his superiors. They knew. They covered for him. And one of them? Was now a city council candidate, running on a platform of police integrity. The headlines exploded. "Cover up at Precinct 12. Mother uncovers years of abuse after son's arrest. Federal inquiry launched into racial profiling network." Elijah never gave a statement. He didn't want to. He went back to school the next week, quietly. No interviews. No spotlight. But his classmates stood when he walked in. Not out of fear. Not out of pity. Out of respect. Because he hadn't screamed. He hadn't fought back. He had survived. And he had sparked something bigger. Officer Granger? He tried to fight the charges. Claimed the video was taken out of context. That he'd followed protocol. But the footage told a different story. He was indicted. Not just for excessive force, but for falsifying reports, abuse of power, and obstruction. And it didn't stop with him. 2 captains were demoted. 1 was fired. Another quietly resigned. And for the first time in that city's history, the police department opened its doors to a full federal audit. But still, Ms. Reed said nothing more. No more press. No more cameras. Until one final moment. A school board meeting. Small. Local. But packed. She stepped up to the mic, same calm voice, same steel gaze. "My son was arrested because someone was afraid of the way he looked," she said. "He didn't break the law. But the law broke him." And then she said it. What happened to Elijah was not a mistake. It was a system working exactly the way it was designed. And that's exactly why we're here to tear it down. The room erupted. Not with applause, but with resolve. Parents. Teachers. Neighbors. People who had looked away for years, finally looking straight at the truth. Elijah didn't come that night. He didn't need to. Because the world finally saw what his mother had always known. He wasn't just a boy in a hoodie. He was a spark. And everything around him was about to catch fire. 3 months later, the courtroom was silent. Not because it was empty, it was packed. Not because people weren't angry, they were. But because justice was finally speaking. Officer Granger sat at the defendant's table. Hair shorter. Eyes tired. Suit wrinkled. No sunglasses this time. The judge read the charges. Slowly. Clearly. Excessive force. Falsification of public record. Obstruction of justice. Pattern of discriminatory enforcement. Granger didn't look up. Beside him, his attorney whispered something. He didn't respond. Because this time, there was no shield. No badge. No union rep standing behind him with fake outrage. Only facts. Footage. And a 14-year-old boy whose name had shaken the entire system. Elijah didn't attend the trial. Ms. Reed did. She sat in the second row. Not front and center, but visible. And when the verdict came down, she didn't blink. Guilty. Every count. The room didn't cheer. There were no gasps. Just a long, collective breath, like a weight being slowly lifted after years of being ignored. The judge didn't mince words. She looked Granger dead in the eye. You abused your position. You targeted the vulnerable. You lied to protect yourself. And worst of all, you thought you'd never be held accountable. A pause. But you were wrong. Granger was sentenced. Not just fired. Not just fined. Convicted. Stripped of his certification. Banned from law enforcement permanently. And ordered to pay damages to the families of every minor he had wrongfully detained. That list was long. Elijah's name was at the top. But it didn't end there. The city launched a civilian oversight board for police conduct. Mandatory body cams. Independent complaint review. Training programs, built by people like Ms. Reed. The mayor called it the Elijah Act. Some called it a start. Others called it too late. But no one could say it wasn't necessary. And Elijah? He never asked for any of this. He just wanted to go to school. To finish his science project. To catch the bus without being treated like a threat. Now, he walks a little slower when crossing the street. Not out of fear. Out of awareness. Because the world looks at boys like him differently. But after what happened, some of that world was starting to change. His classmates voted him most resilient in the yearbook. He didn't smile in the photo. But his eyes? They told the whole story. One day, someone asked him if he hated the police now. He paused. then said quietly, I don't hate anyone. But I know what power looks like when no one's watching. And I know what it feels like to take that power back. The video ends not with a bang, but with a still shot. Elijah, backpack on, walking down the street alone. No flashing lights. No officers behind him. Just the sound of footsteps. And the quiet hum of a system being rewritten. Fade to black. Text on screen. Inspired by true events. To every child who's ever been told they look like trouble. You are more than they fear. And you are never alone.